Hello everyone and welcome to the channel. I'm Emmanuel, I'm an Airbus pilot, and welcome to today's video on how to fly the perfect approach in the Airbus edition. This video is going to be for anything that's an Airbus A320 or newer, so A320, 30, 40, 50, 80, but not for the A300 or A310, because those are a little bit different. In today's video we are going to have a look at the correct configuration management. We will have a look at some items that real-world pilot would pay attention to, and we are going to generally have a look at how you can optimize your approach in the best possible manner. What we're not going to do in today's video is to have a look at the perfect landing, because that one most certainly deserves its own video. So let's get straight into this. The perfect approach. Well, how perfect can an approach actually be? You can follow your standard operating procedures, and you're gonna make sure that you fly it as economical as reasonably possible. Now, in today's video we are intercepting the ILS from an altitude that we are already maintaining. In line flying purposes, you would try to do a continuous descent as much as possible if air traffic control allows for it. Now, if they want you down and level, then fine, do that. Don't go down at 300 feet a minute in order to force a continuous descent. Yes, props going out to you, my former employer. Well, and generally this will achieve as little of a thrust setting as possible, therefore saving fuel. Now, the next thing is the landing flap setting, and that's something that I quickly want to talk about. You can see that I've opted for a configuration 3 approach rather than configuration 4. Now, config 3 basically means less drag and therefore saves money. And a little bit of time as well, since you will be flying somewhat faster. Now, when would I go for configuration 3 versus when would I go for configuration 4? I do have a dedicated video on the topic, so here is the short version of it. Config 3 whenever the runway is long and the weather is good. Config 4 when you either have short runways and your landing performance calculation in the EFB is going to tell you when you need config 4, respectively when config 3 does not leave you with enough margin, or when the winds are gusty, or when you have low visibility. Gusty winds mean that you do want that little bit more drag from config 4 because that makes the airplane a little bit more stable, and low visibility you want the lower pitch from config 4 so that you can see the runway lights earlier. Other options, normally config 3 is the better choice for your landing. Now let's go ahead and have a look at the configuration. So I will release our aircraft over here. Let's hope that it doesn't do stupid things when I'm releasing the pause, but this is actually looking okay. So we're cleared for the approach. Approach mode is armed, and I will be flying this with the autopilot for demonstrational purposes, but note that in practical operation you can fly this manually as well. Makes totally no difference to how good the approach is, provided that you fly it accurately. The first question is, when do we start to configure? Obviously we want to get the flaps out as late as possible in order to save as much fuel as possible. But ATC will not always allow that. So if you have a speed restriction, obviously you get the flaps out in order to be able to fly your speed properly. Otherwise, Airbus recommends to extend flaps 1 latest 3 miles prior glide slope intercept. We're in 4,000 feet over here. That means we are going to intercept a little bit later than normally, but generally 3 miles is the limit. So we can see from our top of descent over here that 3 miles out, flaps 1 is appropriate. Then let your speed reduce down to the S speed and intercept the approach in this configuration. So landing gear up and the flaps in configuration 1. Again, that's always provided that you have no ATC speed restriction. If you do have a speed restriction, then use the configuration that's appropriate for that speed. Note that it is permissible to fly in config 3 with the landing gear up in order to follow an ATC speed restriction. Now, upon glide slope intercept, we are going to set our missed approach altitude So glide slope start comes right now, and then we are going to set the missed approach altitude, which we can get at the very bottom of the plant. So we got first 3000, later 4000, and for this reason 4000 is set up here. Now we are going to maintain flaps configuration 1 on our way down the glide slope. You can see the airplane is built in a way that basically with the flaps in config 1, your engines will almost be in idle following the glide slope. Now flaps 2 is going to be extended latest 2000 feet above your field elevation. If you don't know the field elevation, take it from down here on the ECAM's cruise page. Latest 2000 above the landing field elevation. Note that in the A330 and A340 it is 2500 because the plane just does not slow down properly. So approaching 2000 above the field, we'll go flaps 2. And once the flaps are in configuration 2, we are going to extend the landing gear by standard Airbus operating procedure. So gear down, and this really adds the drag and helps you to slow your airplane down. Note that under some circumstances you might have to use some speed brakes or get the landing gear out a little bit earlier. Now, your landing configuration is going to be selected as soon as your speed allows and with a reasonable margin. So for example, right now we are decelerating at a rather slow rate, so we only have 400 feet left to our stabilized approach gate. So let's get the landing flaps out a little bit earlier, arm the spoilers, and also put the nose light and the runway turn-off light on. And with this configuration established, we need to be completely stabilized in landing configuration by the stabilized approach gate. So let's take a moment, pause the simulator, and talk about the stabilized approach gate. Note that different companies might be using different regulations in terms of when your airplane has to be stabilized, so this can vary by operator. Now, in general, what is the stabilized approach gate, respectively what criteria do you have to fulfill and when do you have to do so? Now, I'll give you the information straight from my operations, but I'll also give you a little bit of insight into what some other airlines might be doing. So, in my operations, by the stabilized approach gate, which is always 1000 feet above the landing field elevation, you have to be established on the correct lateral and vertical profile. And that is basically within 1 dot of the glide slope or localizer, or within 100 feet in case of a non-precision approach, or within 1 light, high or low on the puppies. You've got to be in landing configuration, your speed shall be at the V-approach target, within +10 to -5 knots. The vertical speed is no greater than 1000 feet a minute on the A320 family, up to 1200 on the A330, 40, 50, 80. And only if the approach actually requires a sync rate that's greater than 1000 feet a minute, then a special briefing needs to be conducted during the approach briefing, where you talk about what you're expecting, and then of course you got to fly no greater than that required vertical speed a minute. Now, variations in the rate of descent must not exceed 50% of the target rate of descent, which basically means that with a ground speed of 140 knots roundabout, you're looking at roughly 800 feet a minute, 700 to 800 feet a minute. So you should not be flying less than 400 feet a minute or more than 1200 feet a minute. That's basically what this means. Now, the next point is that your thrust needs to be stabilized on the approach thrust, which is usually above idle. And you can kind of see this in action over here. Our speed is roughly down at the approach, so our thrust is going to increase momentarily here once we go out of the pause, and therefore we just about meet the stabilized approach criteria over here. Your ground spoilers must be armed. There must be no MCDU or EFB handling or entries, and all the briefings and checklists are completed. And that's the stabilized approach criteria. Note that some airlines do permit variances there, so they don't say that the stabilized approach criteria is always 1,000 feet above field elevation. They might say it in VMC, so in visual meteorological conditions, which normally is at least 1,000-foot cloud ceiling and a visibility of 5,000 meters or more. You are allowed to be stabilized at 500 feet only. In IMC, so in instrumental meteorological conditions, worse than the ones I mentioned before, you've always got to be stabilized in 1,000 feet by law. And that's the stabilized approach gate. So let's hope that pausing the simulator and unpausing it doesn't completely mess it over in a moment. We'll be about to find out. And this is basically where you go from the perfect approach into the perfect landing. And that is going to be a part for a dedicated video. So thank you very much for watching at this point. I do hope that you've enjoyed this one. Be sure to leave your feedback in the comments underneath the video. Ignore that traffic over here. And with that out of the way, thank you very much for watching. As always, like, comment and subscribe, and if you really love what I'm doing on this channel, I would appreciate a small donation through the Buy Me Coffee link in the video description below. Thank you for watching, and I'm looking forward to see you all again on the next one.